Hello there, it's Brittany Brown calling, and I was originally trained by Moolah in the late 80s, mid to late 80s. I worked with her a ton. I was on her LIWA. I was the secretary and the treasurer of her LIWA, ran shows with her and worked with her.
So you got to see just about every side of Moolah then, in other words.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we'll bring up the LIWA in a second, but there's been a lot of allegations, or at least a lot of internet experts swirling these allegations about Moolah. Some coming from Mad Maxine, some dated references from Luna, Sherry Martell, and Sweet Georgia Brown. A lot of these saying that she was a pimp, and we'll address that first and then some of the other things. But what's your take on that? You would know firsthand.
Okay, so I am absolutely 110% horrified that anybody would say anything like that. Nothing ever, not even 1% like that happened to me, nor when I stayed down there and lived in the cottages and trained in the gym with the other girls and had 3 roommates. Not one person ever said anything like that, nor did I see anything like that.
And that's what we've been getting. Of course, a lot of folks that are listening or watching these interviews are naturally saying, well, just because it didn't happen to one person didn't mean it happened to the other. But explain to those that might not know the setup of Moolah's camp how close you girls really were in proximity. And, you know, obviously with that proximity, you would share such information with each other.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, if anything like that ever did happen to me, I would have flown back home to Boston faster than you could even write her name down on a piece of paper. And I'm sure most everybody else that I knew there would have too. I lived in one of the cottages that was around the little lake in the back of Moolah's home. To the right of Moolah's home was the training camp. And then there were cottages all around the pond, and there were anywhere from 2 to 4 girls in each cottage, depending on the size of the cottage. I was never charged rent, ever. She never provided me with any food, so I didn't have to pay for any. To her, I bought my own food. I never saw anybody get charged or heard of anybody get charged while I was there. Okay, and the 3 girls that I roomed with never said anything like that. In fact, the rules were spelled out the minute I moved in there, and it was done in front of everybody, that there is no dating, and there were 2 guys living there on the opposite side of the pond that were trained alone, not with us, and we were not to have anything to do with them.
That's the general idea that I've got. Moolah wasn't sending her girls out to be prostitutes for sure.
Oh my God, absolutely not. I was a lady the entire time I was there. Everybody that was there acted, looked, and dressed like that. Nobody, when I was there, dressed provocatively. I just think it was kind of like an unwritten rule. People were not dressed in like short shorts or cleavage showing or anything like that. And everybody that was there at the time was in the old-fashioned type of one-piece outfit.
As you mentioned, you were the secretary for her on some of those shows that you did to raise money for some of the broken down wrestlers or wrestlers that might be going through things. But speaking of money, some of these allegations, not a lot of them, but the few that there are, rather, that everybody seems to be focused on, deals with Moolah taking more than the agreed upon percentage. Do you have any experience with that, or can you speak on that for us?
I can. She never took a dime from me, and as far as the percentages go, I saw the contract. It spelled out word for word, by the penny, what percentage she took. That is the percentage that she took. And 40 years later, or 30 years later, for people to be saying, oh my God, I can't believe she took 30% of my pay. I should have been getting that. I should have been getting that. Well, no, you signed the contract. You wanted on TV so bad that 30% was okay with you. You signed it. That's what she took. Was it high? I don't know. But if you thought it was, you shouldn't have signed it.
Speaking of money and things like that, as you mentioned, you helped Moolah run some shows and some of these charity shows. Now, she's been accused of taking money from these charities and not using them for what they were meant to be. I didn't know that you had connection to running these, but what is your experience with that you could tell us about?
I have absolutely no knowledge of that. In fact, I've never even heard that. No, absolutely not. I'll tell you, the one that she ran in the Northeast, which was ran in Massachusetts, I believe she lost money on. They drove here, these old women, May, Moolah, and Katie, of course. They drove here in their own vehicle, paid their own gas. They stayed at my house the entire 3 days. All three of them did. We went out to lunch, dinner, everything. I mean, they didn't take anything even for themselves out of it.
That's amazing generosity.
Absolutely. I think people believed hearsay from bitter, jealous women. That's what I think. What I know is, in every dealing with her in 3 decades, I never had a bad thing happen. I never had a dollar taken from me. In fact, I found her to be one of the nicest people I have ever met in my life. In and out of the ring. I worked with her in and out of the ring. I totally ran that LIWA here when they couldn't be here because they only came for the 3 days. I did everything. And I'll tell you, this organization, the woman that ran it, was wonderful. And the fact that Snickers and all these internet warriors and the McMahons, fell to this pressure, I think it's absolutely unbelievable, because I'm putting my money on 99.9% of what you heard was not true. I was there. I know.
Would you like to comment on how Moolah positively changed women's wrestling, what she did for the industry, and why she really doesn't deserve this kind of negative feedback, especially now that she's dead?
Absolutely. Without Moolah doing exactly what she did, wrestling herself, training others, being a booking agent, etc., nobody, including myself, everybody from my generation, and these girls in this generation now would not exist if it wasn't for Moolah.
Is there anything else that you would like to throw out there while we do have you on the phone and while you can speak on this forum?
Yes. Actually, there's one more thing I'd like to touch on.
Sure.
That really upset me deeply was the Sweet Georgia Brown story, who I actually never heard of until all of this came out, because the only Sweet Georgia Brown I ever knew was Jacqueline. I saw everything that her family alleges, and I was so upset by this, and I have some knowledge as far as whether or not she was a racist, and I'll tell you how and why I have that knowledge. Jean Kirkland, also known as the Black Venus, lived and trained at Moolah's, was trained by Moolah, was booked by Moolah, worked there and lived there for years. She was one tough lady. I'll tell you, just looking at her intimidated me the day I got there. But we ended up being the closest of friends, and I attended her services in Connecticut when she passed away. And I will tell you, that girl had nothing but good to say about Moolah. Never said a word about the color of her skin, never compared her to others, nothing. She was one of us. We were just like her. Absolutely never did Moolah or anybody there treat Jean any different than any of us. I am so shocked by these things. And I just sit there and I say, the woman that I knew in her house, in the ring, in my house, driving in a car with her, never, ever. It's just simply not true. It didn't happen around me, and it didn't happen to me in any aspect of whether I was a trainee, an employee, a coworker, a board member, whatever I never had anything like that happen, never saw anything like all these allegations. And I was very good friends with Bruna, Gertrude, Trudy, as we know. She never said that to me, and she also has been at my house in Massachusetts, and I never heard her say what they're claiming she said.
About going to the doctor, feeling uncomfortable, and so on and so forth.
She never said that to me. Never, ever. And one of my very close friends was one of her best friends. And I spoke to that girl last night and asked her, and she said, absolutely not. Never heard that.
I really, on behalf of everybody associated with the project, really appreciate you speaking out and being willing to do so.
Oh, not as much as I appreciate you doing this. Believe me, you have no idea. Thank you so much for doing this.